My name is Hans Thompson. That's Hanthomson.
Very good. And the unit that you served with in the 10th Mountain Division, please.
I was in Company I, 86th, when I first came into the 10th Mountain Division, and was later transferred when they formed the 85th and was in K Company, 85th.
Very good. And can you tell me what year you enlisted in the 10th Mountain Division?
Well, I wrote my 3 letters to the National Ski Patrol, and I received a postcard saying that I should present this to the reception center sergeant when and if I was called into service. And I had joined the enlisted reserve corps at Washington State University, Washington State College at that time. And so they activated the enlisted reserve corps, and I went in on active duty in March of 1943.
What was it that appealed to you about serving in the 10th Mountain Division?
Oh, my story is that I was skiing up at Mount Rainier on the 7th of December 1941. That was Pearl Harbor Day. And I had been admiring several young fellas up there who were obviously in the military. They had military skis and OD uniforms. And I had also heard that the National Ski Patrol was recruiting volunteers. So I knew I was draft bait, and I thought, if I get drafted, this would be a wonderful thing for me. I could stay close to home and ski, on the weekends, and ski 7 days a week. Well, of course, I didn't know that recreational skiing was very different from what they were doing during the week. So at the time I was called in, I presented the postcard to the reception sergeant, and he looked at it. He had never seen one like it before, and I thought, I was fearful that that card was going to end up in the wastebasket. But 2 weeks later, I stayed at the reception center, and my name wasn't called, but they had been assembling a party of people who also had had those National Ski Patrol postcards. And when they had I think there were 15 of us who were then put on special orders and sent to Camp Hale, Colorado.
When you went to Camp Hale, did you ever return at all to Rainier to train, or did you?
No, they had already moved to Camp Hale. I never got to stay close to home in the Army.
That would be too convenient, wouldn't it? Tell me a little bit about your most memorable training experience at Camp Hale.
Well, I think for all of us it had to be the D series, which was the final test of our effectiveness as a large fighting unit. And of course, it was during the winter time, and the situations were tactical in that we had to live out in the field under simulated combat conditions, no fires, no hot food, and the nighttime temperatures were extreme. And we did a lot of hiking and climbing, and very little downhill skiing. And so, and that was it 4 weeks? I think we were out, and I think we felt like we had survived a very trying experience, but I think we felt like we had been successful.
Can you think of any particular incident during D series that stands out as being more memorable?
One of the weeks, our battalion was made into was assigned the enemy, the role of the enemy, and during that week, my squad was captured. We were in a defensive position, and this group came up on us, and with a referee, of course, and we were ruled to be captured. So we had to go back down to some kind of an assembly area, and we were interrogated, and then released, told we could go back to our own unit. But they didn't provide any transportation for us, so we had to find our own way through down this long road to get back to our own unit.
What was there any fun moments to D series, or was it just too difficult?
It was not much fun. We, in between problems, we would usually have a day or two out in the field where we could set up camp, so to speak. We could make a little comfortable place, and then we were allowed to have little fires or use our stoves for making warm food for ourselves. That was probably the most pleasant part of the experience.
Did it feel like hard work?
Oh yes, and I think I've never been in such superb physical condition as I had ever been in the military.
Did you have a sense that the 10th Mountain was special?
Yes, we were very proud of that fact, and on the very infrequent times when we could get down to Denver on a weekend pass, we were proud of the fact that we were from the mountains, and there was some ill feeling and jealousy with some of the Air Force troops that were stationed at Camp or Lowry Field, and another, I think it was Buckley Field. So we were quite proud of ourselves, and a little bit arrogant too.
What was the camaraderie like?
Among our group, I think we just felt like we were undergoing the toughest training in the military, and the only ones that we felt were undergoing similar treatment were the airborne troops. A couple of our people in our company volunteered for the airborne, and they wrote letters back and said, "Well, it's about the same as Camp Hale, only we're parachuting out of planes."
Did you have any experience at Camp Hale with the mules? Any experience?
With mules, yes. Mule. We went through a period where we had to learn all of the hitches, how to load how to saddle the mules and hitch loads on. Usually either C rations or water cans or that type of thing, because we didn't have anything to do with the artillery, and we found that they were very skittish and used every opportunity as an excuse to bolt and disperse, and so they were kind of a troublesome aspect to our unit. I think we were impressed with the mules in Italy. They were much more docile, and also they were led by the Italian Alpinis, and they were most helpful in getting our rations and water and ammunition up to the high places where we were located.
Considering the weight of your legendary 90-pound pack, did you sometimes feel that you were the mule?
Well, yes. I don't think that most of us ever carried 90 pounds on a regular basis. In fact, if we knew that we were only going to go out for a day's exercise, we used to do a little cheating. We'd fluff up our sleeping bag and make it look big, but it wasn't quite as heavy as if we carried everything. The only time I had to carry a really heavy pack was when we were going to do some training up at Cooper Hill, and those who volunteered to go up and do KP for a weekend and scrub out the mess hall got a ride up, so in a 6x6 truck. So everybody piled everything that was heavy on our packs. So there were 5 of us from our company that went up, and I have a picture of myself with that pack that I could never have gotten it on by myself. 2 people had to lift it up and put it on my back. But definitely we carried more weight than the flatland infantry had to carry, and in addition to our skis, and those mountain tents were pretty heavy too, if we had to take those along.
When you were in Italy and the Alpini helped you move things around with their mules, did you have a sense that they were very sympathetic to what you were doing?
Yes, they were very supportive and quite disciplined. I was pleasantly surprised that, and particularly that the mules were very docile. And I didn't know at that time, but that they had been deafened, so they couldn't hear the artillery blasts and things of that kind.
That's just as well. When the battle for Mount Belvedere commenced, what do you recall about your experience on Mount Belvedere?
Well, our battalion was charged with capturing the top of Mount Belvedere, and our company was in reserve. I and L companies were the 2 lead companies, and we were in reserve, and we came up the hill pretty much in a double file, and General Hayes had told us when he briefed the battalion on the coming operation, said, you just stay in touch with the man ahead of you, but he said if you do lose contact with that person, just keep going uphill and we'll all meet at the top at dawn. And that was very reassuring to me, that we were, it's kind of a simple operation. The biggest problem was strip wires and shoe mines and things of that kind, and there were frequent halts in the progress. When our company got to the top, most of the active fighting had stopped, but we were there right at dawn, and were told to form a defensive line on the right-hand flank to protect from counterattacks, and we were subjected to several very severe mortar attacks, and we hadn't had time to really dig a foxhole. We really just dug some shallow holes and there was no room for my rifle. I left my rifle up on the parapet, and we were hiding as well as we could below the surface, and the shrapnel shattered my rifle stock and damaged the mechanism of the rifle. But and one of the men in our platoon was killed in that attack, and another one was severely wounded. So when they carried him off on a stretcher, I said, could I use his rifle? And he said yes. So I used that man's rifle all the rest of the campaign. And General Hayes once again had told us, he said, if you should lose your piece, your weapon, he said, don't worry, there'll be plenty of other weapons lying around. And that impressed me, that he really knew from experience what combat was like. And I was really reassured that by his quiet sense of confidence.
What was the next big battle experience you recall?
Well, the next one had to be the worst 2 days of my life, and that was April 14th and 15th, when our assignment was to take Hill 913, which was on the extreme left flank before our final breakthrough. And we had heavy losses going up that slope from I think it was mostly from artillery and mortar fire, and some from machine gun fire. But and our platoon sergeant was killed, and my assistant squad leader was mortally injured, and one other man in my squad was hit by in the leg, and so we had to, and our medic, attached to the platoon, was not available. He was attending to my assistant squad leader, so I had to bind up this man's leg and leave him behind a stone wall, and we went on up, and we successfully took the hill. We had passed through I Company. I Company was really hard hit, so we passed through them, and then we were asked to go up and take 913 jointly with L Company, but several more of our men were killed and wounded in that final assault. The next day, we were to advance down the forward slope of 913, and we ran into some strong machine gun fire going down, and then severe mortar fire. When we got down to the bottom, we were in a little enclave, and we were both our left and right flanks were exposed at that point, and my platoon leader had me take half of the platoon and go over, cross this plowed field of about 200 yards wide, and into another and climb up a bank to make contact with I Company on our left. Well, we started across and were subjected to really severe fire, mostly machine gun fire, and we made it up. Those of us who made it all the way across, there were a couple were wounded on the way, climbed up in this little defilade, and the I Company never did advance, and so we were trapped up there all day long, or all afternoon long, and we couldn't get back, and so we were all alone. About 8 or 9 of us, I guess, left, and the mortar fire was just terrible, and we couldn't even get dug in because mortars were coming in, so we were just hugging the ground. And it wasn't until we were on double daylight savings time at that time. That meant it didn't get dark until about 11 o'clock at night. And so we waited until it was very dark and quiet, and then we had to crawl back that 200 yards back to our lines, and hopefully not get mistaken for German infiltration. But we remembered the password, and they let us back in the lines. About midnight we got back, and at that time they had decided that we should go back up the hill because the Germans had retreated over on to our right. 2nd Battalion had advanced far enough that so we hiked up the back of the up to the top of 913, and the next morning we counted heads, and there were 7 of us who were there. The rest had either been wounded or killed or scattered around. Some had just been lost, or had taken off or something. And my platoon leader said, well, since I was the only one who had any stripes at all, the rest were PFCs, he appointed me acting platoon sergeant. And so we that was the morning of the 3rd day. So those 2 days were just the worst days of my life.
That's 7 remaining soldiers. Can you tell me that's 7 out of how many?
Well, there are roughly 40 in a platoon, and like I say, not all of them had been wounded or killed. Some of them had just either become separated and just were not available, and we didn't know what had happened to them. It's what they call situation undetermined.
So that was 7 out of 40 that
Yeah.
were relieved.
That were a unit.
Well, I can understand how that would be harrowing. Could you describe for me what it's like to be under a counterattack?
Actually, I don't think our company was ever seriously threatened with being overrun. We had some counterattacks, but they were successfully repelled. And I know in the 1st Battalion up on Delle Gatte, they had some serious problems with being almost overrun. And but I can't speak with personal experience.
What of the counterattacks that you did withstand, what were they like?
Well, they were mostly preparatory fire to get you to take cover, and then they would come at you with with foot soldiers, and you had to fire back at them, and until they stopped, retreated.
Maybe you could tell for me a little bit about what happened to you after the April offensive, breaking out in the Po.
Yes, the next day was a day of reorganization. L Company was badly hit, and I Company probably had more casualties than we did, and so we moved over to the next hill and regrouped. And on that day, the rest of the division made a breakthrough, and we were told to assemble on the following morning to a place on Highway 64 and be prepared to move. And we just started. I can't remember. Things were happening so fast. I don't remember whether we were transported by truck to that other assembly area or whether we hiked to it. But at that point, we were there weren't trucks to carry us, so we just started moving forward down this road in a column of twos, one on each side of the road, and every once in a while we would have to be held up by something that happened in the front. But we weren't on the point of the attack at that point. It was either the 87th or the 86th. I'm not sure.
Did you have a sense that you were succeeding?
Well, yeah. Well, yes. But we were exhausted by this hike all day long. Except when we could drop in a ditch for 5 minutes and everybody just fell asleep. And then they said, let's move again. And one night, our platoon leader said, "Well, I think we have to go one more day, and then we're going to be pinched out." That was the word from higher up. We're going to be pinched out by the 1st Armored Division and the 85th Division. We're going to come up, and we were going to go into reserve. And that was, we thought that was good news. Well, the pinch out never occurred the next morning. So they didn't show up, so we had to keep going. And we just kept going for until we got down to the Po Valley, and at that point on the first day, another battalion had been formed into that task force.
Duff?
Yeah, Duff, and so then the second day, our battalion became part of Task Force Duff, and we got to ride in trucks, and that was the day we reached the Po River at about midnight that night. And the next morning, there was
So wait, are you saying that you were among the leading companies to reach the Po?
Yes.
Maybe you could say that.
We were our battalion was the only one that was motorized at that point. Everybody else was walking, and so we then became the point. And about midnight, we reached the Po, and we all we dug little slit trenches because we were behind the dike, and we're anticipated we were going to be crossing the next morning. As a matter of fact, the 87th, one of the battalions, the 87th, was the first battalion to cross, and we were the second battalion to cross the river. We were subjected to a lot of anti-aircraft type fire with timed bursts, and that's when several of us got wounded, including my good friend Monty Worsland, who was severely wounded, and I had what I thought was $1 million wound. A piece of shrapnel hit my boot, and I felt a warm, moist feeling in my foot, and I told the lieutenant, I think I've been hit, and he said, take your shoe off, take your boot off. So I did, and there was a bruise there, but no blood. So he said, put your boot back on, we're going across the river.
What were you thinking as you crossed the river?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised that all of this anti-aircraft fire was aimed at a place on the river where this German observation craft had identified where the concentrated troops are. And so that's where they were firing these air bursts to that point. And after we endured that for quite a while, the decision was made to move downstream about 200 yards. And they didn't, and so by the time we crossed the river, there was no fire overhead. So it was a textbook crossing as far as we were concerned. And we made a beachhead on the north side and didn't meet any opposition, and we're told we had to wait until tanks could cross, so we'd have armored support. So we had 2 days there that we just were in defensive positions.
Tell me a little bit more about your very next experience up at Lake Garda.
At Lake Garda, it was our company that crossed the lake to capture Gargnano, which is the town where Mussolini's summer quarters were. And there's an interesting comment or story about that in the book The Last Ridge, and that was one of the not my platoon leader, but the leader of the first platoon. We crossed at midnight instead of daylight as originally planned, and I think there were 6 ducks, and there was only room for 2 ducks to land at a time, so several of us had to wait out there fully exposed, not knowing what we were going to find. Fortunately, the Germans apparently had evacuated that afternoon, and so now my platoon was directed to go south to the next little town called Bogliacco and set up a roadblock to keep the these combat or which I should, evacuation of German senior officers were coming up there with the tank destroyer in the lead and trying to beat us to the Brenner Pass. And so our job was to set up a roadblock at the south end of Bogliacco and stop anybody who came. Well, I don't know if we could have stopped a tank destroyer, but anyway, no one came. Apparently the last such convoy had passed the day before. And we were met, there's a little interesting story. As we were walking down there, and it was dawn, just getting light, we were walking down this road not knowing yet just what was going on, but we didn't see any opposition. And there was an Italian priest was coming up the road, and he looked, he was about 100 yards away, I guess, or so, and he looked at us, and he looked down again, kind of dejected. I think he thought the Germans were coming back. And as he got closer and closer, he began to see our uniforms and our helmets, that we were Americans. And so he started dancing around in circles, and he came up and were hitting us on the head with on our helmets with his hands, and he was so happy to see us. And so then he took off, running back in the top speed in the direction he had come, and he was going back to be the Paul Revere of Boyaco and tell the town that the Americans were coming. So we began to see, as we passed several houses, that the flags were coming out. The regular Italian flags were coming out, and we were met at the gate of the town by the vice mayor and several of the councilmen, and treated like royal visitors. And they said that they had had accommodations for us. There was a hotel in town that had been used as a prison for political prisoners, Yugoslavian political prisoners, and that had been evacuated. And they said the hotel was at our convenience. It was a two-story hotel with a little old elevator, and they took us up there after we had set up the roadblock. That is, we had rooms and a bathroom, a big marble bathtub, and we hadn't had a bath in two or 3 weeks, at least 2 weeks, and so they set up for the lieutenant, my platoon leader. They had a private room and had a vase of flowers in this room, and my platoon guide and I, the second, we were second and third in command, were given a double room, and the rest of the people in the platoon got, I think, 3 or 4 to a room, and they said, well, after you've cleaned up a little, or lunch will be served in the dining room. So we went down and had a beautiful Italian meal, that was just, we hadn't had anything like that. It had been cold K rations for us. However, the next day, we had dinner that night too. The next day, the maitre d' came to us and said, well, we're very sorry that we don't have any more food left in the town. And we felt very sheepish about that they had been taking all of their stored stuff out of basements and things to feed us. So, but just about that time, our mess caught up with us, and so we set up a field kitchen, and we paid them back with number 10 cans of vegetables and fruit and things of that kind that they hadn't had for a long time.
Tell me about your time up on the Yugoslavian border.
Well, we were stationed in Cividale, which was close to the border, and our mission was to guard all the bridges. So we had to post 24-hour guards at all of the key bridges, and we never really fired a shot in anger there. I think the Yugoslav partisans decided to back off because it was a show of strength. At that point, they started counting points. They were going to have. I said, well, yeah, maybe so, and.
So you became first.
So then I was promoted to first sergeant, and I wasn't 21 yet. But anyway, for a kind of a double party, I was going to have a promotion party and a 21st birthday party. And we'd gotten all of that liquor from the Wehrmacht, and each of us got 2 bottles of champagne and a bottle of brandy. So we decided we were going to have a party in town. So we found a restaurant that had ice. But I knew that champagne had to be iced down, but I'd never tasted champagne before. I'd seen it in the movies during the Depression. All of these people drinking this wonderful nectar of the gods, and I had no idea what it tasted like, but I knew it had to be really special because all those movie stars drank it. And so we got our bottles of champagne up, and there's about 8 or 9 of us, I guess, and opened the first bottle of champagne, and I tasted it. I said, well, this is just wine. It had sparkly wine, but it was wine. I don't know what I expected it to taste like, but I didn't expect wine because I had drunk wine.
How did being in the 10th Mountain Division shape your life, Hans?
Well, it helped start me on a career. I had been involved in summer camp leadership in high school, and when I came back, I went back to my old school principal, and he had been the director of a summer camp.